So at times internal mould can be affecting 25% of the crop. It certainly results in rejections by the retailers because they'll do a cut of capsicums. If they find so many with internal mould, then that whole shipment will be rejected. So it's a big problem.
Welcome to the Vegalogue podcast, a dialogue about the Australian vegetable industry from AUSVEG, your peak industry body. I'm your host, Tom Bicknell. This month, I have a chat with AUSVEG's Lucy Gregg about certification systems for vegetable growers in Europe and the UK and what they could mean for Australian growers. I also talk about a project exploring internal rot of capsicums with Jenny Ekman of Applied Horticultural Research. And I catch up with Ross Pirrone of Pirrone Brothers, winner of the Syngenta Grower of the Year Award for 2023, to talk about the evolution from sugarcane to pioneering vegetable grower. And with that, let's hear about what Europe's rigorous certification schemes could mean for Australia. Thanks for joining me again, Lucy. We've just come back from a 2-week study tour taking vegetable growers around Europe and the UK. And a big focus on that was to explore certification schemes over there. So when we're talking certification schemes, we're looking at programs covering sustainability, good agricultural practices, food safety, and worker welfare. So, Lucy, what bearing does the European certification landscape have on Australian horticulture? What impact could it have for growers locally?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. We had a great trip away and certainly very informative. I think, as we say, the purpose of the trip was to explore compliance systems in the UK and EU so that growers who are considering exporting now or in the future have an understanding of those compliance systems. But also some of those compliance systems are in operation in Australia because people are currently exporting or are being adopted by other retailers who have subsidiary companies in other markets. So we had a look at a range of food safety systems, a range of good agricultural practice systems, and obviously ethical farming. But also on top of that, we saw a lot of, business lean management type certification systems as well. So I think the interesting thing is I'm not sure that they're overly different to the requirements here. Obviously, some of the growers in the UK are supplying 5 or 6 supermarkets. So that makes it more challenging because they have to meet the requirements of all of the supermarkets. The other thing which adds a complexity to the growers over there is that recipe boxes, the people like HelloFresh, are very established and quite big in the UK. So growers have to do additional compliance to meet their requirements, particularly those which are actually doing a lot of processing. So that's one of the things we did see over there, is that the value adding of product and the pre-packing of product is certainly did appear to be a lot more extensive.
And would you say the underlying issues driving certification in Europe are the same as Australia or similar, looking here at factors such as sustainability, a migrant workforce, demand from retailers, that kind of thing?
Look, ultimately they're all managing risks. So I think the drivers in the UK are very similar to the drivers here. One of the things that I think all the group recognised was when it came to product specifications, so product quality on shelves. I think we were quite surprised at the variety of quality we saw. And certainly in some commodities such as, carrots and onions and things, one would say the product quality for first grade was well below what we would probably see first grade here for. So I think that was quite interesting. But the other thing, when we're looking at sustainability, I think the packaging side was also quite interesting, in their journey is to, what constitutes sustainable packaging, particularly when you look at it through shelf life and wastage. So it's quite a complex story, and I think we also saw what consumers say they want in a survey is not necessarily reflected in their buying patterns.
And obviously certification schemes have been around in Australia for quite a long time, but are you seeing they're becoming more prominent, more important for Australian growers?
No, look, I think we're just seeing evolutions of food safety and sustainability programs, ethical worker programs. I think, as certain issues arise or, production systems, things like that vary, we're just seeing a response through those programs adopting fine-tuning. We're also seeing a lot more science available to growers to assess some of the risks or to address some of the risks. So that's obviously being reflected as well. But I think one of the things that we did see in the UK was there was certainly a lot more auditors. They were talking substantial numbers of auditors across many compliance systems, and the costs of auditing were much cheaper than here. So I think that was probably one of the stark differences that we saw. But saying that, a lot of the growers over there spoke about the fact that they had audits 40 out of 52 weeks, which is a substantial burden, particularly on smaller growers. And I think we definitely see that here in Australia as well.
So having seen what's happening in Europe, can you make any predictions for what we might see in coming years on the Australian domestic market or on our primary export markets?
I think that we'll probably see once again just that continual evolution. One thing that did take our interest was the red tractor system and that connection with consumers, recognising the work that growers do and recognising UK product that is grown sustainably, good agricultural practices and ethical treatment of workers. So I think that was really interesting, seeing that evolution. And once again, that keeps changing and adapting. I think that we'll probably like to explore that more because it does give that connection between the consumer and the grower. And I think that's something that's lacking in the current landscape.
Yeah, we haven't seen that kind of consumer promotion of a certification scheme here yet.
No, and even on generic packaging, generic supermarket packaging, they still have the red tractor logo. Proudly saying that it's, UK produced food. And we know that a majority of food or fresh fruit and vegetables in Australia are locally produced. So I think that's something that we could certainly look at, once again, not wanting to reduce extra layers of compliance or audits because that defeats the whole purpose. But I think if we could see more streamlining of the systems, more recognition of the different schemes and what they are, the similarities, I think, getting greater efficiencies is something, and certainly looking at how we can address more auditors who are more skilled across more certification schemes to reduce the cost and complexity for growers is really important.
Thanks very much, Lucy.
Thank you, Tom.
You can't see it until it's too late and we don't know how to stop it. Stalking Australian fields is an invisible killer. A killer of consumer satisfaction in capsicums, at least. Internal fruit rot is a persistent and poorly understood problem in capsicums, caused by several different fungi. It's very difficult to spot an infected capsicum until it's cut open, meaning substandard fruit is sent to market, resulting in waste and damaging consumer confidence. A levy-funded project, Internal Fruit Rot of Capsicum, has been running since 2019 to investigate the causes behind the problem and develop management techniques. I spoke with Dr. Jenny Ekman of Applied Horticultural Research about the project and what the latest season was exploring. I'm here with Jenny Ekman from Applied Horticultural Research, who is working on the Hort Innovation Project Internal Fruit Rot of Capsicum. So Jenny, for those of us who don't work in capsicums, can you describe how much of an issue internal rot is, how widespread it is?
Internal mould is a really big problem mainly for field-grown capsicum growers. It doesn't seem to be affecting those growing in protected cropping. The problem with it is that you can't see it from the outside. It only affects the seed cavity, and it really doesn't affect the flesh at all. The problem really is that when the consumer cuts open the capsicum and they find fluffy stuff in the middle, they will immediately complain to the retailer that they purchase that from. How you can detect internal mould is a really big problem, and so also how we solve the internal mould issue. So at times internal mould can be affecting 25% of the crop, possibly even higher. It certainly results in rejections by the retailers because they'll do a cut of capsicums when they arrive and do a sample of 100. If they find so many with internal mould, then that whole shipment will be rejected. So it's a big problem. The thing is that we believe that internal mould occurs during the infection occurs during flowering. And so preventing it in something like capsicums where the flowering period is really long is also an issue. So it's a significant problem and one that no growers have yet managed to solve or to detect post-harvest.
And so what aspect of the problem is this particular project looking at?
Well, first we were trying to find out the causes of internal mould. And we've identified at least 3 fungal pathogens that can cause this. So it's not a single fungus. It can be a range of different Alternaria and Fusarium species can cause internal mould. Then we were trying to obviously find out how you can stop it or even how you could detect it. So as part of that, we've been running trials looking at the environmental conditions, whether we can induce internal mould by infecting flowers and what outcome that has for the fruit. Unfortunately, we have not yet found any fungicide or fungicide combination that can prevent internal mould significantly. The issue seems to be very sporadic, so we had a very, very wet season and yet there was no internal mould, which is not what we were expecting at all. And then we had a dry season and we got a lot. So what we have found recently is that the windiness of the environment seems to be having an effect on internal mould. So whether it's hot, dry, cold, wet, it's whether there's wind is the critical factor, and that's what we're going to be looking at next. So weather, plant spacing, whether even, I mean, it seems crazy, but having a fan over crops, whether you would just grow the capsicums in a bad season at the top of the hill and not at the bottom, edge effects, that sort of thing, that's what we're looking at next.
So with the wind, it's, I think one of the findings is that still air conditions are the problem.
That's correct, yes. Yes, so the amount of time that the air is still seems to have a really good correlation. We looked at all sorts of environmental variables, and that was the only one that really stood out, was still conditions versus windy conditions. It's not what we're expecting. We actually thought the opposite would happen. We were thinking if there's a lot of wind, there's a lot of spores blown around, there's more chance of a flower becoming infected. But in fact, the opposite is occurring. So this may explain why we've really struggled to predict occurrence of internal mould in the field. What we can do about that, I'm not 100% sure, but at least if we can try to understand the mechanisms by which infection occurs, then that is a step forward. So we've also looked at detecting internal mould in capsicum fruit. There's a couple of growers have put in NIR units to try to scan the inside of the fruit. One of the problems with that is that a lot of capsicums also develop a thing called brown seed, which is a physiological disorder. I mean, it's not really of any importance, but it's a physiological issue. And the NIR picks that up as internal mould as well. Now, the problem is that if you can certainly detect internal mould with an NIR machine, but you are likely to throw out an awful lot of good fruit. And so then you've got to weigh up, well, what are the costs and benefits of doing that? Perhaps the best way is if we could help consumers to understand that this is not actually affecting the flesh, the part that they want to eat. It's only on the seeds. There's no repercussions for the quality of the flesh in terms of eating quality, in terms of food safety, anything like that. It's purely affecting that seed cavity, which you throw away anyway. Whether there's a role for consumer education remains to be seen.
And so the trials that have been running recently, they've been looking at things like fungicide applications, I understand?
We tried a lot of different fungicides. We tried a number of different plant defense solicitors. So chitin, salicylic acid, GA, products like that. So natural products that will, the idea was that you turn on the plant defences and it's more able to resist the pathogen. None of them in our trials have so far shown any significant benefit. But one of the problems with doing these is that there are so many factors coming into play. And of course, as soon as you do a trial, there's no internal mould. And then you finish the trial and then suddenly there's a lot of internal mould. But we've been trying everything we can to see if that's a solution. But I think the issue is that the flowering takes place over such a long time. They're flowering continuously. So trying to keep a protective fungicide on there for that whole flowering time is quite difficult. And, if it rains, then that can be lost.
And so what's the next step for the project? What are you looking at?
The next step is that we're going to do some more field trials. We're hoping for Bundaberg and Bowen, and looking at really getting down to measuring wind speed within crops and then looking at rates of internal mould. So we're going to try to do some heat mapping of a crop where we can look at plants in the centre of the crop, plants at the outside edges, and then possibly increasing or decreasing the wind around those plants through, putting bunding and seeing if that increases internal mould. I'd love to be able to just put a fan out in a paddock and see if that reduces internal mould. Those are the ideas that we're trying to bring together this season. And this will be our final season of trials on this, and we're really hoping we can find something that growers can use.
Right. Well, thank you very much for talking with me about the project.
Thanks, Tom.
This project is funded by Hort Innovation using the vegetable levy and contributions from the Australian Government under project code VG17012. In a farm office near Ayr in North Queensland, there's a shelf that's beginning to groan under the weight of all the awards being stacked on top of it. North Queensland mixed crop operation Pirrone Brothers has been racking up the accolades this year in recognition of the third generation growers' rapid pace of innovation and development. In June, Pirrone Brothers was recognised as the Syngenta Grower of the Year at the Hort Connections 2023 conference in Adelaide. I caught up with business manager Ross Pirrone at the Protected Cropping Australia conference earlier this year to talk about the journey the business has taken from sugarcane grower to vegetable trendsetter. Ross, thanks for joining me today, and congratulations to Pirrone Brothers on being named the Syngenta Grower of the Year for 2023. Ross, yourself and your brothers Josh and Chris are the third generation of the Pirrone Brothers. Could you give me the potted history of the operation and why, after generations of growing sugarcane, you decided to have a go with vegetables?
Dad probably seen the direction that the sugar industry was going, and previously it's always been good to the family for the last 75 years, but he long-term he didn't see a stable or enjoyable future going forward, so he started mucking around with horticulture. And with the help of a friend who was doing a bit of pumpkins, and myself and my brothers were out doing our trades. So I'm an engine builder by trade, and Josh is a panel beater, and Chris is a marine mechanic. So we're all doing our own things. I was at the mines, and then we started slowly doing a little bit as a trial. We picked up some food service contracts, supplying cucumbers and whatnot, a bit of capsicum. And from there it sort of grew, seeing the need to protect the consistency of supply, which led us into greenhouses, which then led me to do a Nuffield, which then led us to supplying Coles supermarkets, which led us to scaling, and the background and why and how and sort of all happened.
So without having that family background in vegetables. How did you go about learning the ropes? Did you have some external support in the early days?
Yes. So at the start, like, we had no idea, and we approached a few growers. There was 2 locally that were unreal. They opened their doors, were genuine a bit with our questions, and still genuine today. And others basically told us to piss off. Funnily enough, they're the ones that copy us now. So it was hard. Like, basically with the advice we did get, at the end of the day, our situation was different to everyone's, like everyone's is. So we had to work it out for ourselves, and it was brutal. It was just brutal. Yeah, it was 10 years. So I suppose a good part of 5 to 7 years of just, learning everything from the ground up. I'd say last 3 to 5, it's like you start piecing it all together, getting a bit of an idea of how we wanted to do it, without the preconceived ideas that I suppose a lot of people have in every industry when you do something for a long time, whether it's their father not letting them change, or, it's just easier to just keep doing what you're doing. We sort of chucked that all out the window and looked at some things that were working in industry, and taking things that were working in other industries across. So the Nuffield helped a lot with that, especially connecting to people that could help with sort of advice in that way, and just seeing how different things can be done overseas and even locally. It was brutal. If anyone looked at it on paper, what would be involved, no one would do it. No one.
Not a lot of off-the-shelf solutions then.
No. Well, it's to the point now we actually have nearly a dedicated fabrication and mechanic workshop building all our own solutions. So there's like a full-time welder, a nearly full-time mechanical fitter, assembling stuff, which all our backgrounds sort of feed into that, being through painting. So it's sort of becoming a dedicated workshop now, so it'll have its own spray booth. Got family members that got engineering and CAD design backgrounds, so he works for us a lot. It's sort of how my father did sugarcane. They used to do everything. I think they used to joke the only other thing they could do was start an iron ore mine and dig the iron, make the steel themselves. Apart from that, they built it all and did everything themselves, which led them to be successful and do stuff more efficiently. Sometimes, a lot of the times it was more expensive up front, but long term it always played out better, and which it set a good foundation just on farm layout and farm design to scale horticulture very well, and different to how the majority of the industry's been set up. Like utilising new technologies, whether it's in irrigation or spraying or whatever, to capture all the efficiencies of, I suppose you call broadacre sugarcane farming, and transfer a lot of that across to small scale horticulture.
So do you think the background in sugarcane has given you, I guess, a sense of scale that some people in horticulture don't have?
A sense of, scale, but also a sense of how to implement efficiencies, like the scale efficiencies. So, a lot of people still pick into buckets, for instance, in a lot of lines, where it just seems ridiculous. Coming from mechanized sugarcane harvesting. So, like some even our pickenades are like retrofitted sugarcane harvesters, full track sugarcane harvesters, because, if a 15 ton or 10 ton sugarcane harvester can cut in the wet, I'm sure it can, carry a couple of pallets of zucchini or produce out of the paddock. So a lot of that sort of stuff, and like infield transporters, like getting stuff, like everyone can farm when it's easy. Like it's easy to farm sugarcane when it's easy. When it's wet, or you got pest and disease, or it's just hard, that's what it matters. It's what the customers sort of pay you to do. Otherwise, they just do it themselves.
So Pirrone Brothers is based in Ayr in North Queensland. Do you think your location has given you any particular challenges, or has it given you an advantage in any areas?
The advantage is water. Growing up, we didn't even realise, but sort of, especially once I did Nuffield and you start talking to other growers in other industries about water security and water cost, It's just not even a factor. Like if you can pay for power, which up until the last, so many years has been relatively cheap, especially in the 90s, it was cheap. If you can afford the power, you can just pump. You could pump every day for as much as you want and just pay for the power, essentially, in some regions of the Burdekin. Other regions have channels and you got to pay for that delivery. But in terms of like just the logistics side of it being, sort of starting to get pretty far away from at least Brisbane, there is associated costs and restrictions there, and the cyclone aspect of it, like the weather, like through the winter months especially, it's perfect. Like the daylight and the daylight length and the temperatures and the relative lack of rain usually, and even when it does rain, because it's a floodplain, it drains well. If we get 200 mil, it's not a big deal over a couple of days. Even 100 mil in a day, it's not fun. But I don't know. You see Sydney and places down south get 60 mil, and it's like they're calling in the army. Yeah, it's not like that. It's good in that way, and that there has its benefits by replenishing the aquifer and the river and the dam and all that. So you need it. But yeah, just the logistics probably the biggest thing.
And so Pirrone Brothers obviously been one of the, the pioneers of protected cropping up north. What does your protected cropping setup look like at the moment, and where's it going?
It's still basic. Our plan, or the reason for doing the field production to begin with and scaling that, was just to supply the backbone and the infrastructure and the base to scale the protected cropping. But as we've gone on, it's still essentially our research facility that we just produce out of now, rather than doing trials. As time's gone on, we've realised that you either have to do it properly, like everything, you do it properly, and which is effectively our version of a high-tech glasshouse, but solving the opposite problems. Instead of not enough light, we've got too much. Not enough water, we've got too much. And not too much heat instead of not enough. So solving the opposite problems, but essentially the core infrastructure, especially looking forward with the advancements that no doubt the glasshouse and Dutch industries will have to make those, like whether it's robotics or whatnot, transferable. We have to do it full scale properly, otherwise forget about it. So, and obviously the problem with that is the cost. The capital cost is excessive up front. Long term, obviously it makes sense. That's why the industry exists. But it's just getting your head around. And then COVID happened, which just put a spanner in the works for trying to do anything like the production we were doing, let alone trying to start effectively a new, like a scaled industry in our region. So they got put on the back burner, but now things are settling down. It's time to talk to people that are interested in partnering with us, and having a look. But it hasn't stopped us building the core infrastructure around the business, whether it's management and physical packing sheds and cold rooms to handle that. It's a bit hard to build that at the same time as scaling any potential indoor production. That's sort of got to come first, which is brutal, because then you got this capacity, which the field, touch wood, has been good. The scale we've done, and we're fully aware that the scale we've done has been pretty fast compared to, I suppose, a lot of traditional growers have spent to do it in effectively 5 years.
So obviously outside the open field veg and the protected cropping veg, you've got a number of other crops in rotation. Can you tell me about what the thinking there is?
Yeah, so we grow grains in the off season. So whether it's grain, sorghum or soybeans or mung beans, this is supplement cash flow, keeps the boys busy, and obviously ground cover in high rainfall events, and then the benefits with the soil and whatnot. That's pretty well established these days. So yeah, it's constant. And with our climate, even through the wet season, if you do the timing right, we can farm 2 to 3 crops a year quite easily in continuous production. Usually it's 2, but yeah, if you're well organised, or the timing sort of suits with certain blocks, you can farm 3 crops a year quite easily. which is different to a lot of other regions. Like there's some regions that potentially can, but like the summer's still a bit too hot and the winter's still a little bit too cold. No doubt our summers are brutal, but you just select crops for it, and usually the costs are a lot lower because we don't irrigate in the wet season. It's usually rain fed, which is good.
So you're involved with a lot of R&D. You mentioned the protected cropping setup you have is still sort of a research operation. What's been driving your involvement with so many R&D projects over the last few years? Well,
If you're not doing it, you just effectively end up doing what everyone else does or worse. It makes it interesting too. Otherwise, I just go work at the mines. Yeah, so it's just the enjoyment fundamentally, and the business side of it, and the sense of achievement and trying to do something. And it's what the market wants. You either got to get more efficient or offer something better for the same money. Sometimes more. Like if people see value in it, then they see value in it. Yeah, it's just trying to find that really, which is why we sort of spent a long time in the research side of things.
And you and Josh are here at the PCA conference this week, presenting on some of your findings.
I think Josh is having a talk about sort of just like the journey we've done, indoors, going from soil to soilless and doing it up north. And I'm talking about they've asked me to come down to have a chat about the Nuffield side of stuff and how that's helped. And
you think it's important to kind of share those lessons that you've picked up over your journey?
Yeah, for people that want to listen. There's some people that want to do their own thing, and that's fine. But for the people that are willing to listen and open sort of their minds to look at other things, then I see it's my way of giving back to the opportunities I were given to sort of see, different ways and different people and different things. Just give back essentially.
Fantastic. Russ, thank you so much for speaking with me, and congratulations again on the Syngenta Grower of the Year award, and Josh, who's just won the PCA Grower of the Year award.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to InfoVeg Radio. Don't forget to subscribe and give the podcast a rating and review to help others find us. InfoVeg Radio is produced by AUSVEG, the pig industry body for Australian vegetable growers. You can find more news and information from AUSVEG at ausveg.com.au, on our social media channels, or in Australian Grower magazine. See you next time.